She was humiliated, cast out, and forgotten. But years later, she returned, and no one expected what she had become. Watch closely. This story will change everything you thought you knew. The morning sun broke through the mist over the sprawling estate of the Marlowe family, owners of Marlowe Holdings, a company known for luxury real estate and ruthless business tactics. Inside the mansion, maids moved like quiet shadows, polishing marble floors and arranging flowers taller than themselves. Among them was Amara, a 26-year-old black woman with warm brown skin and tired but kind eyes. Her curly hair was tucked neatly under a worn headscarf, and her faded uniform hung slightly loose, a silent testimony to skipped meals and long nights. Amara had only worked here for 4 months, but each day felt like a year. The Marlowes, particularly Mr. Ethan Marlowe, the young billionaire heir who had recently taken control of his father's empire, treated his staff with cold detachment. Ethan was only 32, but his sharp jawline, slicked-back hair, and immaculate suits made him seem carved from wealth itself. His mansion echoed with his confidence, or arrogance. That morning, Amara entered the grand dining hall with a silver tray of breakfast. Ethan sat by the tall windows, scrolling through his tablet. His tone was clipped, impatient. "Where's my coffee? I asked for it 5 minutes ago." Amara bowed her head slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. The kitchen was—" He didn't let her finish. "Excuses. That's what poor people are made of." Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured the coffee. She'd heard the same tone her whole life, the sound of someone reminding her she didn't belong. Then, something small happened. Something that would change everything. As Ethan reached for his toast, a piece of bread fell to the floor. Amara instinctively bent to pick it up. At that exact moment, his assistant, Clara, a young woman in designer heels, entered the room and smirked. "Careful, Ethan. Your maid looks hungry enough to steal your breakfast." Ethan chuckled, and to Amara's heartbreak, he didn't deny it. Moments later, when he found out some leftover food from the previous night's party had gone missing, Clara's whisper reached his ear like poison. "She's the one, sir. I saw her near the kitchen last night." Amara froze as guards were called in. "No, sir, I swear I didn't take anything." But Ethan's cold eyes didn't flinch. "Pack your things, you're fired. I don't need thieves in my house." She tried to plead, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, sir, I only took a piece of bread for my little brother. He hasn't eaten." "Enough," Ethan snapped. "You people always have a sob story. Get out before I have you dragged out." Tears welled in Amara's eyes as she clutched her apron. Around her, the other maids stood silently, afraid to breathe. The world blurred as she turned away, humiliated, heartbroken, and without a single coin to her name. Outside, under the blinding sun, Amara sank to her knees on the gravel driveway, clutching her bag of meager belongings. The mansion loomed behind her like a monument to cruelty. But as the wind brushed her face, something stirred in her heart. She whispered softly to herself, through tears, "Someday, they'll see who I really am."
Rain began to fall that evening, soft at first, then merciless. Amara walked barefoot through the muddy streets of the city outskirts, clutching her torn bag close to her chest. Inside were only a few clothes, a photo of her late parents, and a tiny cross necklace, the last gift from her mother before she passed. She stopped under a flickering streetlight, her breath visible in the cold air. Around her, the city buzzed with indifference, Cars splashing through puddles, people rushing by with umbrellas, not one pair of eyes meeting hers. By midnight, she reached a small tin-roofed house at the end of a narrow alley. Inside, her younger brother Tariq, just 11 years old, sat waiting beside a dim oil lamp. When she entered, his eyes lit up, then fell when he saw her tear-streaked face. "Sister, did they—" She forced a smile. "It's okay, Tariq. We'll be fine." He noticed her empty hands. "You didn't bring food again, did you?" Amara turned away so he wouldn't see her tears. "No, not tonight." She wrapped him in her arms, whispering softly, "Sleep now, my little lion. Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow wasn't better. Days turned into weeks. Every job she tried to get ended the same: rejection. Word had spread from the Marlowe mansion. A thief. She stole from her employer. Landlords stopped renting to her. Shop owners refused her work. Her brother grew thinner. And every night she prayed for strength, for forgiveness, for one more chance. Then came the fire. One evening, a candle tipped over in their small shack. The dry wood caught in seconds. Flames roared up the walls. Tariq screamed as smoke filled the air. Amara threw herself into the fire to pull him out. She burned her arm, her hands blistering as she dragged him to safety outside. They watched everything they owned, their clothes, their photos, their memories, turn to ash. She sat on the curb as firefighters put out the last flames. Her hands trembled, her breath shallow, her face streaked with soot and tears. A kind woman approached. Sister Ruth, a local nun who ran a small community shelter nearby. "Come," she said gently, "you and your brother will not sleep on the street tonight." That night, Amara lay awake in a clean but crowded room at the shelter. Children coughed softly in the dark. She stared at the ceiling and whispered a prayer. "God, if there's still purpose in my pain, show me." And somehow, as she spoke, a strange calm settled in her chest, not the calm of comfort, but of awakening. She realized she couldn't keep begging the world for mercy. She had to rise. Amara decided that from that moment on, she would rebuild her life, brick by brick, no matter how long it took. And someday, she would look Ethan Marlowe in the eyes again, not with hatred, but with strength. The morning light filtered through the cracked glass windows of the community shelter. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the corridor, a sound Amara hadn't heard in months. She rose quietly from the thin mattress, careful not to wake Tariq, who finally slept peacefully beside her. Her burned hands ached as she tied her scarf, but for the first time in a long while, her reflection in the mirror didn't look hopeless, just tired but alive. In the kitchen, Sister Ruth was already preparing breakfast, stirring a large pot of porridge, steam rising into the cool air. "You're up early," Ruth said with a smile, her voice kind but firm. Amara nodded. "I couldn't sleep." "Good," the nun replied, ladling porridge into metal bowls. "Then you can help me serve." From that day on, Amara began helping at the shelter. She cleaned floors, washed dishes, cared for sick children, anything that needed doing. No task was too small. But what struck Ruth most wasn't her hard work, it was her heart. Amara listened to everyone who came through those doors, the old man who lost his family, the young mother with no place to go, the boy who refused to speak. She had a way of making people feel seen.
And slowly, word spread. One afternoon, Ruth found Amara sitting with a young girl who refused to eat. The girl whispered, "People say I'm cursed. That's why no one wants me." Amara reached out and held her hand gently. "Then I must be cursed too," she said softly, smiling. "But you know what I learned? Sometimes God hides blessings inside broken people." The girl looked up, surprised, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Ruth watched from the doorway, her heart full. That night, she approached Amara. "You have a gift, not just for kindness, but for leadership. Would you consider helping me run the shelter?" Amara froze. "Me? I'm no one, just a maid who—" "No," Ruth interrupted. "You are someone who has survived. That makes you stronger than most." The following months passed in quiet, determined rhythm. Amara learned how to organize donations, write letters for funding, even speak with local officials. She stayed up late reading books on management and social work by candlelight while Tariq studied beside her. Their little room became a sanctuary of growth, two souls rebuilding from ashes. Then one day, Sister Ruth handed her an envelope. Inside was a scholarship, a full grant to attend a community leadership program funded by a large corporate foundation. Amara's breath caught when she read the letterhead, the Marlowe Foundation. Her hands trembled. For a moment, her mind flashed back to that cold night in the mansion, the humiliation, the pain, the word thief ringing in her ears. But then, she exhaled slowly. She wasn't that girl anymore. Ruth noticed her hesitation. "Is something wrong?" Amara folded the letter carefully and smiled. "No, sister, nothing's wrong. Maybe it's time I stop running from my past." That evening, she walked to the edge of the city, looking out over the skyline glowing in the golden dusk. She whispered, "If pain built me, then compassion will define me." She didn't know it yet, but this decision would lead her back to Ethan Marlowe himself, not as his maid, but as the woman who would change his heart.
The Marlowe Foundation headquarters towered over the city like a monument to ambition. Its mirrored glass reflected the morning sky, calm on the surface, hiding storms beneath. Amara stood at the bottom of the marble steps, holding her worn handbag tightly. Her heart thudded in her chest as people in crisp suits rushed past, laughing, tapping on phones, holding coffee cups. She felt like a shadow among light. Still, she straightened her shoulders and climbed the steps. Inside, the building smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. The lobby ceiling stretched impossibly high, sunlight streaming through it like a cathedral. A receptionist smiled politely, but her eyes flicked down to Amara's simple shoes before gesturing her toward the elevator. As the doors closed, Amara caught her own reflection. Short, natural curls, clean but humble clothes, eyes steady with quiet strength. "I belong here," she whispered under her breath. The elevator chimed open on the 17th floor. A group of young professionals bustled around a long conference table. A woman in a tailored gray suit, the program coordinator, turned and smiled warmly. "You must be Amara," she said, offering her hand. "Welcome to the Marlowe Leadership Program. We're honored to have you." Amara shook her hand, her palms damp but steady. She took a seat, listening as the coordinator introduced the program: community development, corporate philanthropy, social partnerships. Her mind buzzed with new words, new possibilities. Then a deep, familiar voice echoed from the hallway, calm, confident, commanding. "Let's begin. I'd like to meet our scholarship recipients personally." The door opened. Ethan Marlowe walked in. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, sharply dressed, the same piercing gaze. but there were faint lines at the corners of his eyes now, traces of time and weight. Amara's breath caught. The man who once called her a thief was now standing at the head of the room, smiling at his guests like a benevolent king. He didn't notice her. Not yet. And she prayed he wouldn't. Ethan spoke about opportunity, redemption, and using success to give back. The irony was almost unbearable. Each word cut like glass, not because of anger, but because of the strange calm she felt instead. When the session ended, everyone rose to shake his hand. Amara tried to slip away quietly, but his voice stopped her. "You," he said, turning slightly. "I don't think we've met. What's your name?" Her pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. She met his eyes, steady, unbroken, and said softly, "Amara." Something flickered in his gaze, a shadow of recognition that vanished as quickly as it came. He smiled politely. "Amara, beautiful name. Welcome to the Foundation." "Thank you," she replied evenly, her voice calm. As she walked out of the room, her hands trembled, not from fear, from the power of restraint. That night, she sat by her small apartment window, watching the city lights. She thought of how far she'd come. There was no hatred left in her, only the quiet resolve to turn pain into something meaningful. What she didn't know was that Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her either. There was something familiar about her eyes, something he couldn't quite place, and deep down, a flicker of guilt began to stir.
That night, the Marlowe Tower stood in silence. Most of the offices were dark, except one. Ethan sat alone in his corner office, the skyline glittering beyond the glass. A tumbler of scotch rested untouched beside a stack of papers. He wasn't reading. He was thinking. "Amara," he murmured aloud, testing the name against memory. It stirred something faint, a shadow from another life. But his mind brushed it away. No, it couldn't be. He leaned back, rubbing his temple. Why did her voice linger like that? Why did her eyes look so familiar, like someone who had once looked at him with fear and pain? He shut his eyes, and for a moment, he saw it again. A young woman in a maid's uniform, trembling in his living room as he raised his voice, as her tears fell silently. And the memory struck like lightning. He opened his eyes sharply. "No," he whispered. "It can't be her." But doubt was a seed that would not stop growing. Across town, Amara sat at her small kitchen table, papers spread around her. She was preparing a proposal for the foundation, a plan to rebuild community centers for displaced women. It was her dream project, and she wanted to get it right. Her phone buzzed. A message from the program coordinator. "You've been invited to present directly to Mr. Marlowe tomorrow morning." She froze. A mixture of pride and panic flooded through her. This was her moment, not just to prove herself, but to prove that she had risen from the ashes he left behind. She exhaled deeply. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself, "I stand tall." The next morning, the boardroom gleamed under soft daylight. The long glass table reflected every anxious face. Ethan sat at the head, silent, focused, his watch gleaming faintly beneath the cuff of his dark blue suit. When Amara entered, conversation quieted. She placed her notes on the table, hands steady, voice clear. Her presentation flowed like a heartbeat, measured, sincere, filled with quiet conviction. She spoke of women who had been silenced, of children who grew up invisible, of communities forgotten. She spoke of hope reborn from pain. And as she spoke, Ethan could barely breathe. Every word pierced through the armor he had built around his heart. There was something in her tone, not accusation, not bitterness, but grace. She wasn't just telling a story. She was living it. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause. Ethan's hands were the last to join in. As the others filtered out, he remained seated, his gaze following her as she gathered her papers. Finally, he stood. "Ms. Amara," he said quietly. She turned. Their eyes met, again. "I'd like to discuss your proposal further, privately." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Of course, Mr. Marlowe." He gestured towards the balcony. The city stretched endlessly below, its sounds muffled by height and glass. Ethan looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Forgive me if this sounds strange, but have we met before?" Amara's lips parted slightly. The wind stirred her short curls. "Yes," she said softly. "Once, a long time ago." He waited, but she said nothing more. Her eyes held a story he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. And as she walked away, leaving him with the hum of city air and the echo of her voice, Ethan Marlowe realized the truth he'd been avoiding. He remembered the humiliation, the anger, the night he'd thrown a kind woman out into the rain for stealing food she didn't take. He remembered the way she'd looked back at him, not with hatred, but heartbreak. And now she was standing in his building, leading his foundation, commanding the respect of every person in the room. The past, it seemed, had found its way home.
The city lights shimmered like scattered stars across the glass facade of Marlowe Tower. Inside, the silence of Ethan's penthouse felt heavier than ever. He stood by the wide window, a glass of water in hand, untouched, watching the faint reflection of his face against the night sky. He couldn't sleep, not after what he'd realized. Amara. The name pulsed in his chest like an old wound reopening. He remembered it all, the rain-soaked night, the trembling girl in a faded uniform, her eyes red with humiliation as he accused her of stealing scraps from his kitchen. He'd been so cruel, so blind. He closed his eyes, guilt clawing at him. He had thought himself justified back then, protecting his reputation, he had told himself. But all he'd done was destroy someone who had never meant him harm. Now that same woman was back, not as the helpless maid he'd thrown away, but as a leader, confident, poised, radiant. The irony stung him like salt in a wound. The next morning, Amara walked into the community center that bore the foundation's name, the one he had funded but rarely visited. Children ran around laughing, and women gathered in circles, learning, talking, healing. She smiled softly as one of the girls tugged at her skirt. "Ms. Amara, when will you tell us another story?" She crouched down, smoothing the child's hair. "Tomorrow," she said warmly. "A story of strength." But inside, her heart wasn't calm. Seeing Ethan again had shaken something in her she thought she'd buried. Not just the pain, but the memory of fear. The memory of being powerless. She had promised herself she'd forgive, that she'd never let hatred define her. But forgiveness felt different when the person who hurt you stood right in front of you, remorseful, confused, human. That afternoon, Ethan arrived unexpectedly at the community center. He wasn't dressed like a billionaire today. No tailored suit, no polished shoes, just jeans, a gray sweater, and a hesitant expression that didn't belong to the man who once ruled rooms with a glance. When Amara saw him, She froze mid-conversation. The chatter around them dimmed as volunteers noticed the stranger at the door. Ethan took a slow step forward. "Amara," he said quietly. Her name in his voice was strange, gentle, uncertain. She nodded slightly, her expression neutral. "Mr. Marlowe? I wanted to see what you've built. It's beautiful. Alive." She folded her hands. "It's not mine alone. It belongs to everyone who needed a place to start again." He looked at her for a long moment, then lowered his gaze. "I came here to say something I should have said years ago." Her heartbeat quickened. He exhaled, voice trembling slightly. "I was cruel to you, unjust. You didn't deserve what I did. I was a man drunk on power and pride, and I hurt you." Silence. The kind that presses into your lungs and makes you forget how to breathe. Amara's eyes softened, though her lips remained still. He looked up, meeting her gaze. He said, "I can't ask you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear it, that I'm sorry, truly." Amara's throat tightened. For years, she had imagined this moment, the apology that might never come. And now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a wound healing too slowly to close. She turned slightly, her voice low. "Do you know what hurt the most?" He shook his head. She whispered, "It wasn't being fired. It was that you never saw me. You saw a position, a servant, not a person." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "You're right, and I see you now." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm not the same woman you hurt, Mr. Marlowe. But I'm also not the woman who hates you. I have built a life, one that doesn't depend on your regret." And with that, she turned back toward the children waiting for her. Ethan stood still, absorbing every word. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was grace. And for the first time in years, he felt something inside him crack open. Not guilt, not pity, but change.
A week passed. Ethan found himself returning to the community center more often than he expected, sometimes with donations, sometimes just to watch from a quiet corner. He never intruded. He only watched. The place buzzed with life. Children's laughter echoing down painted hallways, women learning to read, young men planting trees outside. Every corner carried warmth, something money could never buy. And always, in the middle of it all, was her, Amara. She moved with purpose, sleeves rolled up, voice calm, face radiant even in exhaustion. Ethan noticed the way people looked at her with trust, respect, and love. It was the kind of power he'd chased all his life, but never earned. One afternoon he arrived earlier than usual and found her struggling to lift a heavy box of books. Without a word, he stepped forward. "Let me," he said softly, taking the box from her hands. Amara froze for a moment, startled, then allowed him to help her. He set it down gently beside her desk. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Thank you," she said finally. Ethan smiled faintly. "You're welcome." There was an awkward pause. Then, to his surprise, she spoke again. "You've been coming here often." "I have," he admitted. "At first, I thought I was helping you. But it turns out this place helps me." Amara tilted her head. "How so?" He looked around the room. the laughter, the warmth. When you spend years surrounded by boardrooms and numbers, you forget what real people look like, what hope looks like. She studied him for a long moment, trying to see if he meant it. His tone wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, honest. Over the next few days, Ethan began quietly assisting with small projects, helping organize supplies, talking with the volunteers, even fixing broken chairs. It wasn't the image of a billionaire, and that was exactly the point. One afternoon, Amara found him kneeling on the floor beside a group of children, helping them build a model out of cardboard. They were laughing, all of them, including Ethan. It stopped her in her tracks. For a moment, she saw not the man who had humiliated her, but someone trying, truly trying, to become better. When the children ran off, she approached. "You're good with them," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged, smiling. "They don't care who I am. They just care that I'm here." There was a silence, comfortable this time. Amara folded her arms. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. He looked at her, curious. "And what did you expect?" "A man who came to wash his guilt away." Ethan chuckled softly, but there was sadness in it. "Maybe that's what I came for, but it's not why I stayed." Amara looked down, unsure how to respond. Something in his tone stirred emotions she didn't want to name. Pity? Empathy? Maybe even warmth. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, a fragile friendship began to form, not spoken, not forced, but born out of shared purpose. They worked side by side, laughed at small things, disagreed on others. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the rooftops, Ethan and Amara sat outside the center, watching the children play. "I used to think success was measured by what I could control. Now I think it's measured by what I can give." Amara smiled faintly. "And what have you given?" He turned to her. "A little money, but mostly my pride." She chuckled softly, the first genuine laugh he'd ever heard from her. "You're learning," he said, "from the best." For a brief, delicate moment, their eyes met, not as enemies, not even as strangers, but as two souls finally beginning to understand one another. But just as peace began to settle between them, something unexpected threatened to shatter it. A scandal within Ethan's company. An exposé accusing Marlowe Enterprises of exploiting workers overseas. The same kind of injustice that had once ruined Amara's family. And this time, Ethan would have to face it, not as the cold businessman he once was, but as the man he was struggling to become.
The morning the news broke, the world felt colder. Headlines screamed from every screen. Marlowe Enterprises accused of exploiting workers overseas. Boardrooms erupted with panic. Investors withdrew. Social media lit up with outrage. And right in the center of it all stood Ethan Marlowe, the billionaire once untouchable, now exposed and vulnerable. Inside the community center, Amara was unpacking boxes of supplies when a volunteer showed her the headlines on their phone. Her hands froze mid-motion, her eyes scanning the words, heart pounding. The headlines weren't wrong. Marlowe Enterprises had profited at the expense of workers overseas, though Ethan had been unaware of many of the day-to-day abuses, decisions made by managers he trusted blindly. Yet the world didn't care for nuance. Later that day, Ethan arrived at the center. His tailored suit had been replaced with a simple shirt and slacks, tie loosened. There was a fatigue in his posture, a hollow weariness in his eyes. Amara noticed immediately. "Ethan," she began cautiously. He waved her off. forcing a faint smile. "Don't. I've already seen the news." Her jaw tightened. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to cry. The anger she had buried for so long, the resentment of the man who once fired her for poverty, flared up, demanding release. "You knew what your company did," she said, voice trembling but firm. "How could you not? People suffered, Ethan." He looked at her, guilt written across his features. "I didn't know everything. I thought I did, but I was wrong. I trusted too easily. I failed, not just you, not just them, but myself." Her chest heaved. "I gave you a chance to change. I believed in that. But this is a test I didn't sign up for." Ethan lowered his gaze. "I understand. And I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do the work, the real work, to make it right. Not for my company, not for my image, but because it's the right thing to do." Amara looked away, conflicted. The old wounds threatened to resurface, the memory of humiliation, poverty, and despair. Yet the Ethan for her wasn't the same man that had fired her. He had worked to understand compassion, to act with humility, and even now, he wasn't hiding behind wealth or pride. "Actions matter more than words," she said finally, her voice calm but resolute. "If you want to make this right, you have to show it, not just to me, but to everyone affected." He nodded solemnly. "I will. I promise." The following weeks were grueling. Ethan poured his energy into investigating Marlowe Enterprises' overseas operations, uncovering the layers of corruption and neglect that had gone unnoticed. He faced angry employees, scathing media, and disappointed colleagues. Every step of the way, Amara observed, sometimes silently, sometimes questioning. The man who had once been his own harshest critic was now working to understand compassion, to act with humility, and even now he wasn't hiding behind wealth or pride. One rainy evening, as the two walked through a factory floor illuminated by dim overhead lights, Amara spoke quietly. "You've changed," she said, almost a statement, almost a question. Ethan glanced at her, water dripping from his hair. "I'm still learning. Every day. But I want to be better. For them. And for you." She studied him, searching for any trace of the man who had once judged her harshly. Instead, she found determination, humility, and a quiet strength that no wealth could buy. For the first time in years, she felt hope. Not for revenge, not for validation, but for reconciliation. The scandal had tested them both, but it also revealed a deeper truth. Transformation is never easy, but it is possible. And as the storm of public outrage slowly calmed, a fragile bridge formed between them, one built not on power or status, but on understanding, empathy, and shared purpose. Amara realized that standing beside Ethan now was not weakness. It was choosing to witness growth, to nurture compassion, and to be part of something larger than herself. The final challenge remained. Could the world forgive Ethan? Could the communities harmed by his company believe in his sincerity? And more intimately, could Amara fully let go of the past to embrace a future with him? The answers would come, step by step, through action, through care, through courage.
Months passed, and the once stormy headlines slowly shifted. Ethan's transparency and relentless effort to correct Marlowe Enterprises' missteps began to make a tangible difference. Factories were upgraded, workers compensated, and new oversight systems were implemented. Media outlets cautiously reported on the billionaire taking responsibility, highlighting his commitment to real change rather than image management. Amara watched these developments quietly, still cautious but undeniably impressed. Her heart once heavy with the weight of past humiliation, began to lighten. She had witnessed the man who had once fired her in arrogance transform into someone capable of empathy, humility, and justice. One afternoon, Ethan invited Amara to a gala, not for pomp or prestige, but to officially launch a foundation dedicated to supporting displaced workers and underprivileged communities affected by Marlowe Enterprises' previous negligence. The grand hall shimmered with soft lighting. Guests from all walks of life mingled: former factory employees, nonprofit leaders, and local dignitaries. But Amara's attention remained fixed on Ethan, who now moved through the crowd with calm authority, his every action demonstrating genuine concern for the people around him. At the podium, he paused, scanning the audience until his eyes found hers. Tonight is about more than restitution. It's about creating opportunities, rebuilding trust, and proving that we can be better. And none of this would be possible without those who inspire us to do the right thing, especially one person whose courage and compassion have guided me every step of the way. Amara felt a flush of surprise and a quiet pride. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, awaiting her response. Later, away from the crowd, Ethan approached her gently. "I never asked for forgiveness. I only hoped you'd see that change is possible, that I can be someone worthy of trust." Amara studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes, the quiet strength in his posture. She remembered the humiliation, the anger, the pain she had endured. Yet she also remembered the countless small actions, how he had listened to workers, how he had admitted mistakes, how he had fought to repair what was broken. Slowly she extended her hand. She said, "I see you, and I believe that people can change, but it's not just about seeing, it's about feeling it too. You've shown me that you're trying, and that matters." Ethan's lips curved into a gentle, relieved smile. "Then maybe we can start something new, together." Amara nodded, a quiet tear glinting in the warm light. Together. In the following months, the Emeka and Marlowe Foundation, named to honor the both past struggles and future potential, became a beacon of hope. Formerly exploited workers found jobs and training, communities received resources, and the billionaire CEO learned lessons that no wealth alone could teach. For Amara, life had shifted from survival to purpose. She no longer bore the weight of humiliation. Instead, she carried the power of forgiveness, resilience, and a renewed belief in humanity. Ethan, once defined by wealth and status, discovered humility, compassion, and a deeper understanding of leadership. His bond with Amara transcended romance. It became a partnership rooted in mutual respect, shared goals, and a commitment to making the world better. One evening they walked hand in hand through a quiet park near the Foundation's headquarters. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, reflecting off rippling water. Children played nearby, laughter carrying softly on the breeze. Amara glanced at Ethan, a smile tugging at her lips. "We've come a long way." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "And there's still a long way to go, but I wouldn't want to walk it with anyone else." They paused, taking in the peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the storms of the past. For the first time in many years, both felt whole, and both knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The story of pain, betrayal, and redemption had come full circle, from humiliation to empowerment, from brokenness to hope. And in that quiet golden moment, it was clear: true change is possible, forgiveness is powerful, and love can grow even from the deepest wounds.